The smell of burning chili didn't just sting the nose in Olorun-Omi, it signaled a shift in the political weather. Tunde leaned over the copper pot, his silver-tipped tasting spoon hovering an inch above the roiling crimson surface of the broth. Around him, the kitchen of the Gbadamosi compound was a theatre of war. Men in tailored suits paced the perimeter, their hands resting on the holsters beneath their jackets, while the humidity of the Lagos coast turned the air into a wet wool blanket. "Too much atama," Tunde whispered, his voice as cold as a morgue slab. "The bitterness is assertive, aggressive. The Okeke family will see this as a declaration of intent, not a peace offering. Dump it." "Dump it?" The head chef, a man who had cooked for 3 presidents, looked ready to weep. "That's 40 litres of premium stock." "It is 40 litres of a death warrant," Tunde snapped, wiping his spoon with a silk handkerchief. "I am a taste hunter, not a caterer. I don't care about your stock. I care about the fact that if the Gbadamosi and Okeke patriarchs sit down to a unity feast that tastes like a grudge, the third mainland bridge will be a graveyard by sunrise." Tunde walked out, his leather shoes clicking on the marble floors. He had a reputation for being the man who could taste a lie in a sauce and a betrayal in a dessert, but even he knew he was out of his depth. The sovereign soup, the legendary dish required to bind the two families in a blood pact of peace, wasn't a matter of chemistry, it was a matter of soul, and Tunde hadn't felt his own soul in a decade. He found her in a corner of the city where the salt spray of the Atlantic met the smoke of 1,000-year-old hearths. Simi's kitchen was a lean-to of corrugated iron and ancient mahogany. There were no silver spoons here, there were only clay pots, blackened by decades of fire, and the rhythmic, hypnotic thump-thump of a wooden pestle. "I heard the Iceman was coming," Simi said without looking up. Her arms, dusted with the white flour of ground yams, moved with a grace that made Tunde's analytical mind stutter. "I need the sovereign soup, Simi," Tunde said, staying in the shadows of the doorway. "The cartels are at each other's throats. The peace talks have stalled. You're the only fire chef left who knows the old rhythms." Simi stopped pounding. She looked at him, her eyes 2 bright embers in the dim light. "The sovereign soup isn't a recipe, Tunde. You can't measure it with your digital scales. It's a mirror. It tastes like the people who make it." "Then we make it together," Tunde said, stepping forward. "I have the finest ingredients in West Africa, saffron from the north, Uda pods that cost more than your house, water from the sacred springs of Osun." "I don't need your gold, taste hunter," she laughed, a sound like low thunder. "I need your hands, and I need your heart. If you want to stop a war, you have to be willing to feel the heat." The next 48 hours were a descent into a sensory underworld. They worked in the cramped heat of her kitchen. Simi refused to use his refined salts or his imported oils. She dragged him to the Market of Whispers at 4 a.m., forcing him to smell the dirt on the ginger and the bruises on the tomatoes. "Taste this," she said, holding a piece of charred alligator pepper to his lips. Tunde leaned in, his breath catching. As his lips brushed her fingers, a spark, not of static, but of something far more volatile, leapt between them. He tasted the pepper. It was sharp, citrusy, and then a slow, deep burn that felt like a memory of a sun-drenched childhood he'd long suppressed. It's lonely," Tunde whispered, shocked by his own words. Simi smiled, and for the first time the Iceman felt a crack in his chest. "Now you're cooking." As the deadline for the Unity Feast approached, the friction between them shifted from professional to primal. They argued over the acidity of the lime, they fought over the timing of the crayfish, but between the arguments there were silences that grew heavy with the scent of jasmine and sweat. Tunde found himself watching the way the firelight played across the curve of her neck. Simi found herself watching the way his hands, usually so stiff, began to move with a newfound trembling fluidity. On the final night, they stood over the great pot. The soup was almost done. It was a masterpiece of balance, the heat of the peppers dancing with the sweetness of the onions, the earthiness of the herbs grounding the ethereal scent of the spices. "It's perfect," Tunde said, leaning close to her. The steam rose between them, a veil of flavour. "No," Simi whispered, her face inches from his. "It's missing one thing." She reached out and took his hand. Tunde didn't pull away. He pulled her closer. When they kissed, it wasn't a cinematic moment of soft music. It was an explosion of every flavour they had spent 2 days hunting. It was salt and honey, fire and rain. They stayed like that for a long time, the world of cartels and guns fading into the background. But when Tunde finally dipped his silver spoon into the pot to perform the final check, his face went pale. "Simi," Tunde whispered, "taste this." She tasted it and gasped. The soup was bland, not just under-seasoned, but empty. The vibrant, complex architecture of the flavours had vanished. It tasted like clear water, despite its rich amber colour. "What happened?" Tunde panicked, reaching for his salt, his spices, his scales. "We followed the rhythm. The ingredients were perfect." Simi looked at him, her eyes wide with a realization that was both beautiful and terrifying. "The Pepper-Soup Pact," she whispered. "The legends said it, but I never believed it." "What legends?" "True love requires no seasoning, Tunde. When the cooks find peace, the food loses its edge. We've fallen in love, and in doing so, we've ruined the only thing that can stop the war." "We have to fix it," Tunde shouted. "If we serve this water to the Gbadamosis and the Okekes, they'll think we're mocking them. They'll burn the city." "You can't spice a heart that's already full," Simi said, a tear tracing a path through the flour on her cheek. The hour of the feast arrived. The 2 patriarchs sat at a long mahogany table in the centre of a neutral garden. Behind each sat 10 armed men. The air was so thick with tension that the cicadas had stopped chirping. Tunde and Simi tarried the Turian together. Tunde's hands were shaking. He looked at the 2 men, vultures in expensive shirts, waiting to be offended. The soup was ladled out. It looked beautiful, but Tunde knew it was hollow. The elder Gbadamosi took a sip. He frowned. He took another. The elder Okeke did the same. He looked at Gbadamosi. "What is this?" Gbadamosi growled, his hand drifting toward the waist of his trousers. "Is this a joke? Where is the fire? Where is the bite?" Tunde stepped forward, his heart in his throat. He looked at Simi, who stood defiant, her hand still resting near his. "It is the flavour of the morning after the war," Tunde said, his voice steadying. "We searched for the most aggressive spices in the land to satisfy your pride. But as we cooked, we realized that pride is a spice that eventually burns the stomach. What you are tasting is not water, it is the absence of a grudge." The 2 old men stared at him. Then they looked at each other. The elder Okeke took a long, slow swallow. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing. It tastes like nothing," he murmured. "It tastes like silence." "Exactly," Simi said. "And silence is the only thing your families haven't shared in 50 years." A long minute passed. The safety on a rifle clicked in the distance. Then the elder Gbadamosi laughed. It started as a dry chuckle and grew into a roar. "Silence! The boy serves us a pot of silence." He looked at Okeke. "I am tired of the burn, aren't you, old friend?" Okeke nodded slowly. "My throat has been on fire since 1994. Maybe nothing is enough for one night." The peace treaty was signed over empty bowls. Later, as the sun began to rise over the harbour, Tunde and Simi sat on the steps of her kitchen. The sovereign soup was gone, and the city was quiet. Tunde pulled a small crushed pepper from his pocket, a simple shombo. He offered it to her. "You know," he said, "I think my palate is ruined. I can't even tell if this is hot or sweet anymore." Simi took a bite of the pepper and then kissed him, the heat of the chili finally returning to their world, but this time it was a fire they had chosen together. "It's neither," she whispered against his lips. "It's just us."